First, let me define what I mean by innovation. I mean when an organization is able to routinely innovate, time and again come up with that which is both new and useful. And the reason why it requires a different kind of leadership is that we actually know that most innovation is the result of bottom-up activity, not top-down activity. And all innovation is voluntary. You cannot force someone to innovate. They have to be willing to do it. And consequently, it's not about you having a vision and inspiring people to follow your vision. Instead, it's about creating the kind of context in which people will be willing to co-create with you a new and useful solution to some problem or some opportunity you're trying to address. So if you want people to be willing to innovate, then what you need to do is create the kind of environment that will allow them to feel psychologically safe enough to do the kind of risky work required for innovation. There are four things that we know about all innovative work. One is innovation is a journey. It's usually a collaborative journey among people with different expertise and different points of view. The second thing we know is that innovation cannot be planned for. You have to act your way to an innovation, so it involves discovery-driven learning. And the third thing we know is that most innovations aren't completely new. They're often the combination of new and old ideas. And finally, what we really know about innovation is even though it can be fun and exhilarating, it's also extremely hard work. As one of our leaders described it, it's scary work. So you as a leader have to create the kind of context in which people will be willing to collaborate together, to do discovery-driven learning, to actually do decision-making in a way that they can combine ideas and sort of just live with the risks and the fears associated with doing this kind of work. And that goes to whether or not you create the kind of culture that leads people to think that this is going to be a safe place for me to do it and it's worthwhile doing it. What we found is that the leaders who build organizations that could innovate time and again really focused on two things. One is they focused on creating the kind of environment where people would be willing, so they really worried about the culture that they were creating in their particular team or business unit or organization. The second thing that they worried about was whether or not they were creating the kinds of capabilities that allow people to do innovative work. And so what they did is they focused on how do we create the environment where people will collaborate, do discovery-driven learning, be able to do decision-making in a way that they can indeed combine ideas. So we found that there were three capabilities that these leaders really focused on building in their organizations. The first one was creative abrasion, and that was about creating a marketplace of ideas through debate and discourse. All of the research tells us on innovation that unless you have a robust pipeline to work with, lots of alternatives, you're much less likely to come up with a solution that is truly new and useful. The second capability was creative agility, and this was the ability that was really necessary for refining that marketplace of ideas, testing them. So what you see in these organizations is they know how to test an idea, get feedback on that idea, and then adapt accordingly. The third capability was creative resolution, and that capability was about how decision-making was done. And what we basically saw in these organizations is that they were able to do decision-making in a way that you actually could combine ideas. So that meant you couldn't let one group dominate. Instead, they had a more patient and inclusive approach to doing decision-making so that everyone had an opportunity, relevant parties, to have some input into what was being worked on, and they were patient enough to allow the group to work through it. The reason why I think there's so much focus on innovation at the moment is that basically many organizations are having trouble figuring out how to grow. And in this environment that we live in, growth is what is valued. And the only way most organizations can figure out how to grow, you cut all the costs you can cut to become as lean as you can, as productive as you can, then you've got to think about what are you going to do about the top line. And that tends to be having to come up with something new and useful to do. And so that is why I think innovation has become so important. The other reason, though, is that many of the opportunities and challenges we face, either in companies or in society, require different ways of thinking about how we do things. Companies are facing challenges and opportunities that the old just doesn't cut it. They can't even survive, nonetheless thrive, unless they begin to pursue new and different ways of doing things. The other thing I should say about an innovation, what we saw at organizations that were very innovative, is they had what we would describe as sort of a democracy of innovation. What they do in terms of this democracy is they build organizations that aren't simply focused on the breakthrough, if you will, but also on the everyday kind of innovation. So have everyone understanding that they have a role to play, to always be looking for ways in which the organization could be creating that which is new and useful. And also, the last piece of that I would say, and why it's become so important, innovation is not really simply just about the top line. Now you have to reduce costs in a much more I don't know, dramatic way to make a difference. Like if you're going to be trying to compete, if you're a retailer trying to compete against Amazon, your cost structure needs to be, it's not a matter of an incremental change in your cost structure, it's a matter of a very revolutionary change in your cost structure. And again, that tends to be something that's more in the innovation space and not just in the change space.